You know that old cliche, right? The lone wolf hacker, sitting in a dark basement, wearing a hoodie, typing furiously away at a glowing green screen. Well, today, we're going to completely shatter that myth. Because the reality of modern cybercrime, it's highly corporate, it's deeply structured, and it is incredibly industrialized. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a fascinating case study that literally redefined how we look at digital heists, the corporate anatomy of cybercrime, and specifically, we're deconstructing the GozNym network.
To really grasp why this matters, we have to look at the staggering scale of this operation. The GozNym network infected more than 41,000 computers and attempted to steal an estimated $100 million. And they weren't just casting a wide net and hoping for the best. They specifically targeted businesses and financial institutions across the United States and Europe. The financial stakes here were absolutely massive, and as you'll see, it was all executed with this chilling corporate efficiency.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our playbook for the Explainer. We'll cover the cybercrime supply chain, the anatomy of the attack, cashing out stolen funds, the coordinated global takedown, managing third-party risk, and finally, building an integrated defense.
Starting off with Section 1, the cybercrime supply chain.
To truly understand what made GozNym tick, we kind of have to flip how we normally think about supply chains. Usually when we hear supply chain attack, we think of a bank's trusted software vendor getting hacked, right? And then the attackers use that inherited access to get to the downstream customers. But GozNym, they operated a cybercriminal supply chain. They didn't compromise a legitimate vendor. Instead, they actively leased malware and recruited specialist criminals directly. It's an early textbook example of cybercrime as a service. The entire supply chain was built strictly on the attacker's side of the fence.
Just like a legitimate enterprise has an IT department, marketing, and finance, the GozNym network had a literal corporate roster. They recruited highly specialized roles, mostly from Russian-language underground forums. You had malware developers actually building the tools, spammers distributing them, cryptors tasked with hiding the code from antivirus software, account takeover specialists breaking into the banks, and finally, drop masters and money mules laundering the cash. It was a complete end-to-end financial crime operation. Everyone had a strictly defined job to do.
Which brings us to Section 2, anatomy of the attack. Let's break down how they actually did it.
So how did this specialized roster execute the infiltration? Well, it all starts with the code itself. And here's the wild part. GozNym wasn't even built from scratch. It was a hybrid. It combined the Gozi banking Trojan, which was coded specifically to steal banking info, with Nymime, an established downloader mechanism used to infect systems. By renting this sophisticated hybrid, the attackers completely bypassed the massive cost and expertise needed to build a Trojan from the ground up. The creators get to monetize their code across multiple campaigns, and the attackers get this enterprise-grade weapon ready to go on day one.
Once deployed, the attack flawlessly escalated across multiple domains. It usually started with targeted phishing. The moment an employee fell for, say, a fake invoice, bam, we hit Step 1, endpoints compromise. That rapidly evolved into Step 2, identity compromise, as the malware secretly captured online banking credentials. That stolen data was then passed to a central panel, leading to Step 3, unauthorized access by the attackers. Finally, it culminated in Step 4, payment fraud, seamlessly transitioning into money laundering. It's crazy to see exactly how a single, seemingly harmless email balloons into a devastating financial breach.
Now, to keep this massive operation online, they relied on something called bulletproof hosting, specifically the Avalanche network. This wasn't some innocent cloud supplier that got hacked. This was infrastructure deliberately built and provided for cybercriminals. Bulletproof hosting supplies servers and routing that are specifically designed to resist law enforcement takedowns. The Avalanche network was so robust, it actually hosted over 20 different malware campaigns and served more than 200 different cybercriminals simultaneously. They all remained operationally separate, but they were sharing the exact same hidden servers.
Moving on to Section 3, cashing out stolen funds.
Because here's a reality check. Just capturing passwords doesn't automatically put money in your pocket. You can't just put a multi-million-dollar bank heist on autopilot. And this is where the human element really comes into play. GozNym brought in account takeover specialists. These were highly skilled individuals who would manually access that central command panel, sift through the stolen credentials to find the most valuable accounts, and physically log into the victim's online banks. They had to manually navigate banking controls, draft payment instructions, and be totally ready to react if a bank's fraud system challenged the activity.
It really highlights a chilling reality of industrialized crime. To quote the case, the malware developer might never touch a victim's money, The financial system connected them. There was an absolute, strict separation of duties here. The technical hackers writing the code were doing completely different jobs than the money mules at the end of the chain. The people controlling the beneficiary accounts might have had zero involvement with the original phishing email. They were entirely separate contractors, literally only connected by the illicit flow of money through the global financial system.
Let's move to Section 4, a coordinated global takedown.
So you're probably wondering, how on earth do you stop a threat that is this incredibly decentralized? Well, in 2019, law enforcement struck back. Because the criminal network was spread across the globe, a localized prosecution in just one city or country would have completely failed. Basically, it takes a decentralized network to defeat a decentralized network. The 2019 takedown required an unprecedented level of coordination across the United States, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Germany, and Bulgaria, all of it heavily supported by Europol and Eurojust. They initiated prosecutions in 4 different countries at the exact same time, sharing evidence and running coordinated searches against different members of the same network.
However, we do have to objectively note the limits of an operation like this. While the takedown was a massive, historic success, law enforcement obviously has geographical boundaries. In this case, several Russia-based defendants remained fugitives. A single bust, no matter how huge, doesn't permanently erase the cybercrime as a service model. Disrupting this requires targeting the entire service chain across multiple varying locations, which remains incredibly difficult to sustain globally.
Section 5. Managing third-party risk. Let's look at what this means for the defenders.
If attackers are out there actively exploiting supply chains, legitimate institutions desperately need to manage their own dependencies, and the regulatory landscape is rapidly tightening around this very concept. For example, the European Union's Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, which kicked in back in January 2025, makes this abundantly clear. The core message you need to take away is this: outsourcing a service does not outsource accountability. Boards of directors are fully on the hook for understanding how their critical functions depend on external tech, whether that's cloud platforms, payment processors, or software libraries, and they need to know exactly how they'll respond if that tech is compromised.
To do that, you need a resilient control stack. That starts with dependency visibility, using things like software bills of materials, so you aren't just guessing what code is running in your systems. You need rigorous risk assessments to evaluate both a supplier's security and your own institutional dependence on them. You've got to implement secure software controls, like code signing validation. You need strict contractual rights that clearly define notification times and audit capabilities. And crucially, you absolutely must have tested recovery alternatives. You have to know how to isolate a provider and transition safely if using them suddenly becomes a massive threat.
Finally, Section 6, building an integrated defense.
To build an ultimate defense strategy, we have to look at the core issue. Think about it. On the cyber side, teams monitor things like endpoint alerts or unusual API calls. Meanwhile, on the financial side, completely different teams are monitoring atypical payments or suspicious recipients. They are often working in total silos. But this mapping brilliantly illustrates what GozNym proved. A technical cyber alert and a financial fraud alert are actually just different views of the exact same attack chain. A new session login and an unusual beneficiary risk aren't separate problems. They are literally just steps 3 and 4 of the exact same heist.
So, the crucial point here is that your objective has to be identifying and closing both paths. Think about it. If you only stop the malware, the attackers still have their money mules and their laundering infrastructure completely intact. But if you only freeze the suspicious payment, the attackers maintain technical persistence in your servers and they'll just try again tomorrow. Modern financial crime defense requires deeply integrating your cyber threat intelligence teams with your fraud and anti-money laundering teams. They have to work together.
GozNym showed us that cybercrime becomes vastly more scalable when criminals divide their capabilities into specialist services. To reverse that advantage, we have to integrate the exact teams, the data, and the controls that the criminals fully expect to remain separated. Which leaves us with one final, absolutely critical question for you to consider today. Are your cybersecurity and financial crime teams looking at the same attack chain? Really think about that as you evaluate your own defenses. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your shields up.